everyone. Welcome back to the Profitable Franchisees podcast. My name is Tracey Leak and I am your host. This is the podcast where we bring powerful strategies and stories to help you to be a more profitable franchisee. And today's topic is one that a lot of people talk to me about, especially when I'm out at conferences and things, and it's about working with the younger generation. And we've all heard it, X, Y, Z, Alpha, all those names. And instead of bringing in some generational guru, I thought it was far more appropriate that I actually bring someone in who works with these generations every single day. And the best thing about Dan, who is from Boost Juice, has been a franchisee with them. He's been a franchisee with them for a couple of decades. So he's actually seen some of the different generations over that time. So instead of us talking theoretically about all these young generations and how to work with them and things, let's get really practical and talk about how you actually work with them on a day-to-day basis. So welcome, Dan, to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you, Trace. Thanks for having me.
So let's start off with, let's talk about your story about how you got into Boost and what your journey has been like with Boost over the last couple of decades.
Okay, don't have to emphasize the decades. I'm not 100 yet, but it's been a good journey. We started in 2005 in Boost, and we'd come out of our own cafe businesses before that for about 6 years. So, yeah, 20 years with Boost Juice this month, in fact, if memory serves, because it was a while ago. But we started off with, I think we got to 2 stores in the first year, and over the years we got up to about 7 stores across 3 different brands under the kind of Retail Zoo banner. So there was 2 other food brands that we worked with over the years. And then I think probably for the last bunch of years, it was probably about 5 stores on average that we managed each year. So yeah, we've had a number of people work with us over the years, but it's been a good ride with Boost. It's been through the good and the bad with it, I can tell you that. And I had the privilege of training about 50 franchisees through their stores and setting them up. And I think today's topic is really important, actually, because for me, it's kind of one of the markers of success is how well you can actually lead and manage young teams, particularly in our retail industry where we hire a lot of young people.
And that's what I was going to say. Your business is full of that younger generation. And as we said, everyone talks about them. I don't even know if I know all the terminology correctly for them, the Y
Yeah.
generation, Z generation, Alpha,
Yeah.
millennials, but I think millennials are now Ys and it gets confusing. What are your thoughts about this younger generation?
Oh, that's such a loaded question for me. Like every conference I go to, someone wants to roll out a generational expert. And look, there might be some nuggets to be gained from that, but you're really overcomplicating it. It's just people. As a civilization, we haven't changed that much in 40,000 years. We're still driven by a lot of the same things. And honestly, people just love working for people that care about them. Give them a brand they believe in, a business they want to be a part of, make them feel valued and engaged. And you don't need to understand those generational things. Okay, when you may need to understand it is when I had to stop writing emails and start using WhatsApp. And even an old man like me figured that out about 12 years ago or more. And I even got my mum and dad using WhatsApp now. So if they can do it, you've got nothing to worry about. So the rest of it is just coming down to you leading those people properly, and engaging them in the business. And there was a time post-COVID we had to work a little harder to find people, but those values I've essentially for me haven't really changed for good people. It starts with us being good leaders.
I think that's such a good point, and I knew you had that thought pattern. That's why I wanted you on today, is that I do agree with you that most people are overcomplicating this generational topic. And it's a great keynote. It's a great thing to talk about at conferences. But in reality, we are dealing with people, and it's no different to, how do you work with a male compared to a female? How do you work with someone in an older generation? I've worked with some franchisors who are learning how to work with older generations. But in the end, we're all people. And I think, if that's the only thing everybody gets out of this today, and you'll get more, believe me, it was our first question, but when you said that to me one time, I don't even know where we were, and you said to me, "Oh, well, it's not about generations, it's about people." I think we'd actually just heard a
You
generational
did it.
speaker talk at a conference, in fact. And I
It's
said, "What are
exactly
your
right.
thoughts on this?" And you said, "Well, I just treat them like people." And I went, boom, that was better than this whole 45-minute presentation I just heard.
I
Um,
think we nearly died in that presentation, didn't we? Wasn't a particularly good one.
um, when you're hiring new team members, so, we're talking about them people, but in reality, you're hiring potentially teenagers who have never actually ever had a job before. This is their first work experience. And so it's very easy to hire people off a CV when you look at their previous work experience. What are the things that you're looking for because they don't have work experience? How do you know that they're going to be great when you bring them into your team?
Yeah, it's a good question. And look, I absolutely have to raise my hand and say I'll make as many mistakes as the next person. But I probably hired over 2,000 people and I'm still figuring some things out. So let's be clear. But um, when you've got young people, I think it comes down to attitude, the values, and experience that they do show. And I did this presentation. I got taught to do this presentation on recruitment many years ago with some consulting work I did. And when I had to learn it, it was this one nugget that I've carried for 15 years that I still absolutely love. And it was simply that people are always communicating to you. It's just whether or not you're listening. Okay. And so it's rarely just what they've written on the resume. They're talking to you by how they've communicated, how well they've communicated. Did they show up early? What were they wearing? Do they know their phone number? Are they organized? That is like critical for me. If they come rolling in, oh, I don't know my phone number, I've run out of credit. You don't want the dog ate my homework type of people. Right? So they don't show up. And kids are predisposed to that at that age because they're still figuring it out. So we've got to see through some of that. Um, if you tune in to the way they're communicating, and this goes for any age group actually, then you're already ahead of the game, and you're not surprised by certain behaviors. And sometimes you have to role play this during the recruitment process too. You have to give them a chance. Like it's important to get rid of the nerves. You don't want to bring them in front of a panel jury when you're trying to hire, and you're just going to decimate these young kids, right? So we used to get them in a room, do a group audition, and then get them to do activities and interview each other for us. And then when they're talking about the other person, they're actually demonstrating their values and what they're looking for. And sometimes kids would be saying, this person's really great, they're really friendly. And you go, okay, that's cool. And then the next person will go, actually, this person's great because they work hard, they demonstrated their values playing on a soccer team, they exhibited leadership skills. And it's that person that you're going, okay, that person recognizes what it takes. That work, you do have to show up. The fundamentals don't change. You've got to be on time. You've got to be organized. We do want to have fun, but fun comes when you're organized. You don't roll in, turn the music on and the lights on and good things happen. So it's the other way around. So if we're hiring with that kind of approach, you're just opening yourself up and brand alignment's really important as well. And there's some things you'll learn with experience you can build in, especially if you're encouraging as a leader. And there's other things that you can't fight against. And so if they don't show up properly and organized in particular, that's so important for me. I remember an old guy in our network many years ago was a school teacher, and he said, I love hiring for our brand with good academic grade because that's another way they've demonstrated commitment and hard work. And so just all these little things that are just common sense. Like there's probably people out there going, okay, where's the nugget? Okay, well, there's no nuggets. It's just building all this evidence, and sticking to it a little bit rather than going, oh, this person's really cute or, I really like them and I know I've made mistakes when I thought, oh, you see the good in them and you feel a bit bad and think, oh, yeah, I'm going to take a chance. And you was wrong more often than you're right, unfortunately. But, and not that I don't believe in giving people a go, but they do have to demonstrate that readiness for certain jobs in retail, particularly if it's fast paced. So it's horses for courses as well.
I think there was lots of nuggets in that, by the way. I love the group audition. That they're actually talking about someone else because it'd probably take away that pressure they feel on themselves of, like as you said, the panel of having to ask themselves. They're actually connecting with someone else their age and I love that they're drawing something out of someone else, but it's actually demonstrating who they are. Um,
Yeah, we loved it.
what sort of traits, you said readiness, what sort of things come under that? Is it sort of a maturity level? Is it, you said organized? What are the sort of things that you look for that have turned into your best team members?
Those things that I love are when they talk about, are they have they demonstrated those abilities to show up? Do they keep a diary? Like I ask them to, when I'm telling them to do things, do they take notes? Are they being prepared? How do they show up? If they don't know their phone number, if they've run out of credit, all these like clues that telling me in their life they're not organized. Organized, I have to repeat it, is like number one, two, and three, because I know that that's 50% of them showing up organized. Because you give them the job and they start not showing up, or they're always 15 minutes late, or they missed the bus, or they forgot that they had a shift. And these are all things that I go, well, you're taking yourself out of the job. Like I'm putting the opportunity there. And, I've recently had one staff member got 3 shifts, cancelled them all because they wanted to go away, got one shift and then turned up an hour late. And then 4 days later said, can I have more shifts next week? And I was like, let's talk about the disconnect between your behavior and my experience. And now you want more, but let me explain. And these are the important conversations. And I said it literally in this vein because I actually love this kid, but they need to learn. And there's another part of it, I guess. And we got told this at the conference, if you remember. And this was quite shocking that when we're hiring young people, we're almost, because of two people working now, parents working, we're almost finishing off the raising process of other people's kids. Like it's hard enough with my own, but there's skills that they haven't learned that we've got to continue reinforcing, or behaviors and values. So not that parents are doing a terrible job, but that's the age too. Like you got to you're taking part of that on when you're hiring teenagers.
And I mean, it's not a new generation. I remember being a teenager and
It's
learning
exactly
things
right.
in a job, and that was, as many years ago as you, because well, you're a little bit older than me, so
I
we'll
knew
keep
you were going
going
to
with
throw that
that.
in. I
I knew
knew
I
you
was
were
going
going
to
to
say
throw
that.
that in.
Just so everybody else knows, Dan's birthday's one day after mine, but he's actually a year older than me. So taking it from that, like when you've hired them and you've sort of mentioned that, and I love the organization thing because everything you said is the things that people complain about teenagers when they've hired them, like, oh, they don't turn up for shifts or they're always late. And don't blame all teenagers on that. That's picking out the people who are organized. So when you do hire them, how important is that induction phase, bringing them on potentially, especially when they may never have had a job before? Is there extra things you need to do? And do you put a real emphasis on induction?
100% I do. In fact, it's probably one of the things that haven't met many people that have done it more consistently or better than I have over the years, because it's something I'm so committed to. And it actually came out of recognizing that I wasn't particularly good in some areas leading the team. And I realized that I found it hard to have difficult conversations. And I realized it was hard because I hadn't set them up properly, and it was going to come as a surprise to them because I wasn't having the conversations that were required either at the beginning or during their employment. And it builds up in you like a volcano for bad leaders, right? And then all of a sudden you explode and everyone's surprised at the outcome. But you've damaged the relationship because you've just gone straight to getting crazy with them. And thinking in your head, like most business leaders do, business owners do, why don't people get this? Why don't they think like me? It's like, if they did, they'd be self-employed. So you've got to put that mantle down, get that monkey off your back because it's going to kill you. Like, so many people carry on like that. Why don't they? I just need another me in my business. I need 10 more me's. Um, Unfortunately, the bigger your team gets, even becomes impossible. When it's impossible anyway. But when we sit them down for our induction, especially if they haven't had a job, it's surprising what you do have to build them through. Just the way the shifts work, what's the expectations of them, what's the non-negotiables. They need boundaries. Just like actually I was going to say most young people, but it's really most people in general. We need boundaries of behavior, we need to what's expected of us. And when you understand it's not actually that complicated, if we can achieve that, they should feel comfortable doing that job. And if they don't, you probably haven't set the expectations well, or you're not managing the expectations and outcomes and consequences well. You do need the carrot and the stick and a combination of both. But if you haven't set it up in the beginning, it's really difficult to manage along the way. And when you do speak well and induct well, it's so much easier because you can circle back and write it out. I have a 2-page induction sheet. I go, this is what I told you. Where are you at? When I said this to you, what did it mean to you? Now, what does it mean to you now? And let me give you some feedback on that, rather than, hey, guess what? You're doing a crap job. That doesn't help anybody. But if we can use our position descriptions and overlay that with that conversation, this great presentation I saw once was how the brain, particularly for boys, and this is no surprise to you, Tracy, matures quite late, and some of those emotional regulators don't finish for men till 25 or 45 in some instances. But so we're dealing with young people whose brains haven't properly fully developed yet, and so we've got to be patient on that journey and really step things out. And they'll be put in experiences perhaps that they haven't been in before under pressure, and they're going to bring a lot of the norms they've had at home or in their little community to work. And it's really important to set it good at the beginning, but also it's got to be presented well in your culture as well within your team. That's almost as powerful, because if you set them up for success over here when you start them and then drop them into an underperforming team, guess what's going to happen? You're dropping an aspirin into a swimming pool, they'll just dissolve into the normal culture. But it's the other way around. If you've got an average induction with a really high performing team, that will lift them up as well. So it's important. I love to focus on that, because then it makes the leading so much easier later on, because you're honest and forthright in the beginning about your expectations. So then all these leadership and performance management conversations later on should be just par for the course. And they shouldn't just always be about what they're doing wrong. It should just be a reminder or a chance to have a chat and reconnect, because they're people rather than generations. What's important for you? How's it measuring up? And how are we along the journey? And what can I do better? And what can you do better? And just having that conversation makes people better, even without bringing up things that make them better or worse. Just tuning in, and not different to just standing beside them in store and talking about the weekend. I mean, face to face and really tuning in, a really powerful kind of moment.
I'm listening to everything you're saying here, and I'm like, I need to almost retitle this podcast from younger generations to leadership qualities, because that's kind of what you've talked about here is everything. And I think that's true. We talk about younger generations, but people are people. The things that you've talked about there are things that you need to do as a good leader. Oftentimes people are talking about where their team are not doing the things they wanted to do. And, I always say, if you want a pumpkin, plant a pumpkin seed. If
Yeah, I
you
love that.
plant apple seeds and you're complaining you didn't get a pumpkin, well, you didn't plant the right seeds. And everything you've just said there is, how do you plant those seeds in induction that allows you to set up the framework for a difficult conversation, which won't be difficult because you've set up the framework. It takes out that angst of it. And I think that's where a lot of people are going wrong, especially with that younger generation. They're not setting them up for success. They're chucking them in the deep end and
Yeah,
hoping they'll swim.
I've got so much feedback of hiring people from other businesses, and they're shocked, even 20 years after I've started, that I'm still inducting every single human in my business. No one else is allowed to do it,
You
because
do it personally.
absolutely. On occasion, I'll sit down with one of my store leaders and do it with them, but I've never ever let anyone induct, unless on, I think, one occasion in the last 5 years I was on holidays, and my business manager did it, because it's also, then they work for Dan. They're not just working for a business or a company. They're not a number. They're a human. And I get to have that one-on-one. So it's so much easier for me to come back around and go, doing well and love that, don't love that, but we're connected. And I remember there was a phase when I would always do that, but it was harder to circle back when we had 7 stores and you're running around or you're particularly busy. And I noticed that our attrition rate rose. It went up, and I had this epiphany. And this was after being operating for 12, 15 years, that I had to spend more time just back with them again. And as soon as we did that, the kind of the loss rate of staff went down again. It was really noticeable. But if you It's easy when you have multiple stores, you're a multi-site franchisee, there may be people you haven't seen from, and they don't have that connection to you. They're probably much more connected to their team leader. And if you lose that team leader, you'll often get a washout, and your
Mm.
30% will go within the next 3 to 5 months. Like it will when businesses sell. You guarantee when a business sells, if you don't lose 30% of the staff, something's wrong. And that old kind of 30-30-30 rule, 30% will go, 30% will stay if you lead them well, and um, 30% will stay anyway. And they're the ones that it's not always the right way either. You've got to be careful who you let go and who you let stay, particularly when you're taking over a business. But it's so powerful that change to culture that it has a big impact on your team. And it's something to be mindful of.
We all know, we talk about being profitable on the podcast, right? And so we understand that, hiring younger people is cheaper. Just that's the way the world is. Our award wages do that. And so on the face value, that's great for profit margins. But what are your thoughts on this? Is it just about hiring younger people? Is that going to actually make you more profitable?
Yeah, good question. Well, first of all, cheap isn't the same as productive. Okay. And you really have to consider what style of business you're running and what type of leader you are and what leaders you have in store. So personally, I lean towards an older crew because I don't want to be a kindergarten teacher. Okay. So, and I should add, there's a bit of a lifestyle in it too. So if you want to turn up every day, drive the business hard, you're happy being the school principal, if you will, telling them what they've got to do, how long it's going to take, what the expectations are, and repeat yourself a lot, get in store with a bunch of 15-year-olds. Okay. If it's product driven, then you might get away with that as well. Like I noticed, and I hate to call out brands, but I know the KFC stores fill it with really young kids, but it's a very product driven business. You're not necessarily there for the service. And one of the key things about why I hire a bit older people is because they're in charge of a expensive asset if you're not there. Your business is worth 300 to 1,000 to $1 million, and the frontline defense is a 16-year-old with a really troublesome customer who's about to blow up. What skills do they have to manage that on your behalf? Because that's the face of your business right then, right there. And you'll do a good job, but you're not there 24/7. So these people by proxy are representatives of you. So how are they showing up when things go bad? And all the little things in between. Are they building relationships in the community? At Boost, we're not a destination business necessarily. Macca's and KFC will get the business anyway. You're never going to see the same face twice. But if I can hire a uni student, say, they'll do 2 to 4, maybe 5 shifts a week and get this continuity. That's what I learned at the cafes. You get that barista, he makes a good coffee. You want them to come to my store and go, yes, I know her. She's going to make a great mango magic. And we don't often get that at some of these mega brands. You'll never get the same face twice, but you're going to get a cheeseburger or you're going to get whatever. So you've got to think about what's appropriate for your business as well and how you want those people showing up and representing your business, and then how much of a micromanager you want to be with these young people, of varying ages. And it's a big shift too between, even just between 16 and 20. It's such a big leap, because we're all growing so much as humans, our maturity changes, our capability changes so much. So it can make a big difference. And so I like to keep it balanced. Like it can be more expensive, but I know in my case, the productivity from just slightly older team, it outweighs the rest, by far. So, and I stick to that. And, it's the type of business I want to run as well.
Just as a thought, when you were talking, the thought came to me, just knowing what the reason why they have the job, does that help with productivity? Like I think back to when I was a teenager and, I worked at Macca's when I was 15, 16, and I was about to go on a Rotary Youth Exchange overseas. So I wanted the money, I was saving up, I had a purpose for it. When I came back and then I went to uni, I went back to Macca's. I was a part-time manager at Macca's through uni. But that was actually my livelihood. I put myself through university. So I was super productive and I wanted that job because it was my income. That's how I lived. Do you find that it's a difference if you know why a kid wants a job? Does that alter how they work
Oh,
for you?
100%. That's a great point. In fact, it kind of made me think of two things. So one, that's what I mean by having those conversations at induction and performance management follow-ups. Sitting down, how can I align what you want with what I want? Like that's super important. Like, what are you studying? Because to my second point, why are they also, why is what they do for you, why does it matter to the business as well? So what's the link? Because if it's just turning up and checking in and out of a job, no one's really going to double down. But if you can show them, hey, even working at Boost Juice, there's things you're going to learn here that are going to take you right through the workforce for the rest of your life. How do you show up on your personal brand? How do you show up for the team? I always love to use that example. You know, you're on the sidelines, you're about to step onto the pitch. What do you want to be remembered for? When everybody looks at your name on the roster, do they go, hell yeah or hell no? You know, and this is going to affect you for the rest of your life. How do you show up? And that is a real trigger for young people to step up. That's when the light switches on because they'll look at people and go, oh my God, that person's so great. I go, why are they great? And what do they say about you? How can you grow into that great person and be that shining star? Because this is going to follow you for the rest of your life. And you're either aware of it or you're not, but it's there, it's going to happen. You know, so think of how they think of you and they see you on the roster. And how can we help each other get there? And that's a real trigger I've noticed over the years and kind of one of those real growth points. You can literally one day see the light turn on.
Absolutely love that. Like, what is someone else going to think when they see your name on the roster? Because that's peer to peer. I mean, when you talk, I mean, that makes me think about that. If someone saw me on a schedule, what would they think if they saw I was coming to their conference? Would they be excited or
Yeah.
would they be like, why are we having her again? You know, like for teenagers, especially when they see that, that's building that peer to peer with them where they go, I want people to want to work with me. And so it's drawing the best out of them by using a leverage point of tool. I'm going to use that heaps. I'm going to R&D that. For anyone who hasn't listened to the podcast yet, R&D means rip off and deliver. I love that. What would people think if they saw your name on the roster? You know, are they going to want to work with you? So leading into that, how important is it then to talk with your, you said team leaders, store managers, you know, with your leadership team, how important is it to pass on the skills and knowledge that you have of working with, you know, hiring over 2,000 people? How important is it to train and induct them to work with these people? How do you pass that knowledge on to them so
Yeah.
you're getting that continuity?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point. It, it comes by working side by side and throwing them into some of these situations and never just like, okay, I shouldn't say throw them in, but coach them in and through these situations. Like one of my favorite things and quite powerful is to bring my managers in and let them start doing the rosters. Because when you're not doing the rosters, you get all the whinging from the team. Oh, Dan hasn't given me enough shifts, or why didn't I get that shift? And I could have done this, this, and this. And then I go, okay, now come to my side of the ledger and let's have a look. And then they go, oh, they said they could do that, but they're only available. You know, they want 25 hours a week, but they just applied for 5 days off. No, they had a shift, but they gave it up. Oh, they had a headache that day and didn't show up, but they still wanted 25 hours. I'm going, there you go. Now let's walk through this side of things and see how people's performance matches their talk in store and their whinging, you know, and because we're quite often blind to our behavior and reality sometimes, and it's really obvious when you have an empirical ledger of when people can and cannot work on the calendar, and then all of a sudden they want more than is possible, or you can see the history of how they have manipulated things, but they don't tell everybody that when they're whinging. So just that little like micro example is how you can build your leaders up to go, okay, I see the bigger picture here. I've got to be careful of what I listen to and pay attention to and store. And that builds a lot of maturity. And then the other nugget is always going back to what it was like on your first day, right? And you said this before about, I do think I'm probably a bit hard on them sometimes because I remember as an 18-year-old, I was a buffhead. You know, I've got these young women and I'm coaching them and I might pull them up on things and I do look and go, I would never have been able to do this at your age, but I'm still gonna ask for more. Um, But that's a good feeling too, knowing that you can build great people and make them better. But it's all part of, I guess, making it okay to learn. And you've got to let them fall over and make mistakes. I think that's really important. And then when they do make mistakes, coach them through their reasoning, not just the outcome. Because, okay, so why did you make that decision? Let's break that down. Okay, well, your reasoning was good, or maybe not, and you can coach through any those moments, but that teaches them how to reason, not just good or bad outcome, because you can make good decisions, still get a bad outcome. It was just too stressful. You were too busy that day. It was outside your control. But if it was in your control, what could we have done better? But let's think about that because you're building them up rather than if you just teach them for a different outcome, they don't know how to get there. And I can think of a recent example, and it takes time. Some people, and it's never everything. People are really good in pockets, I find, and if you can just build that confidence in other areas, like it might be they're good in ordering and they're bad with coaching. That's a really common one I find. If they're good with numbers, they can do the ordering real well, manage inventory well, but they just don't know how to coach humans. Then we have to work. I go, oh, yeah, now how do you think you're coming across in this particular fashion? Because in your head, it means one thing. It's just common sense. But in their head, it's insulting and they don't get it like you do. And you just got to bridge that gap. Um, yeah, heaps of examples of young people like that. But I always find it good to go down it and even role play through some of those things with them. Rather than just going, you did a good job or bad job, you really have to build the steps up there for them and help them believe in their reasoning or coach them to think of the bigger picture a bit too sometimes.
When you're working with team, and it's not just the managers, but even your team at the junior level, what do you do to keep them motivated? Like, how do you get them to stay on system, that they don't go off system, and then also not see you as like the big bad boss? What's something easy and practical that you've found works to actually keep that connection with your team ongoing?
Yeah, that's a good one. I like building in non-negotiables. Staying on system, we have to demonstrate that every day. And you really do have to back it up with consequences. Um, and that takes a lot of courage sometimes because people get scared they're going to lose people, but people adapt really quickly. And once it becomes a non-negotiable, you're not chasing it anymore. Chasing sucks. Following up is the hardest part of management, right? And if you're constantly doing that, it's your failure. As soon as you start acting out, following up hard, it only takes a week to 3 weeks, things settle down, and then it just becomes a normal behavior. And for me, I guess part of demonstrating that also is just to work in store beside them, and a bit to what we've been talking about. When I go into store, I don't necessarily turn up to be Dan the boss. I turn up to be Dan the boosty. I've already got a leader in store, so I let her lead, and so I can just sit there and go on wash up and just kind of direct from behind. And I love doing that. I'm at the back of the store. I'm constantly analyzing. I can see where the gaps are if I need to step in and help. But then, my manager is the one organizing the breaks. She's writing the stock runs. She's sending people, and I don't want to smother that just because I'm in store. And then it just allows you to have a bit of fun. Like you're allowed to have fun at work as the boss as well. In fact, that's important for me. But you've got to build it in. And if you've got the processes good and you're comfortable and you can have good conversations, then it's not that difficult. Like it shouldn't be difficult. And at that age, they're allowed to have fun as well. Like you want them to come to work and we can't ask them to go and smile if we're whipping them behind the scenes 24 hours a day, because it comes from the inside out. That's one thing I loved about the Boost brand and watching good teams is if you can't fake fun. If you're getting smashed inside the store and culture's poor, no one's turning around and going, oh, hey, and smiling for the customer. That it always leaks, and it becomes a really introverted store when the culture's bad. So I just love getting in there beside them and having a crack and you build that rapport and they remember that who they're working for. And it can be really underestimated, I think, by a lot of people, especially if you've got multi-sites, you never show up or you show up, with your business shirt on. I just get there in uniform, make sure you show up with your team, stand beside them, and just all those little things, conversations and lessons you'll learn that even after 20 years, I still love doing it. And I've had some real epiphanies getting back in store, working with the team and going, God, I've missed things, because you can imagine a lot and you can get stuck looking at reports and numbers, but you can't drive a business through a laptop. It's important, but you got to get out in front.
Funny listening to you, I remember back to being, a teenager and at university working in those first jobs and things. And I think about it now and I think about all of the great lessons I learnt in those days from people that I worked with and with leaders and managers and owners. Have you got a story? Like give us a feel good story of someone that you might have seen as a teenager. You've been around long enough now that you've seen
Thank
them
you.
grow and expand. Yeah, I'll just keep digging them there for you.
Yeah.
Um,
You've seen
but
so many generations now. Yeah.
what is there a story of someone that you can remember as starting out with you, or of a teenager that's come and they've gone on to something, or is there, I remember talking to someone. It was at the multi-unit summit for the franchise council that we both helped organise, and I remember one of the franchisees, I think it was with Red Rooster, and he was talking to me about he loves it when he has he sees all the siblings come through and work with him. He's worked with entire families. Do you have those sort of stories?
Yeah. I got heaps of those stories, which is a blessing. Like actually a recent one, I went to Bunnings the other day and bumped into a fella my age. He's a dad. So it turns out he started coming to Boost. I could have been, I don't know, when I started, probably around 2009, and he had like his 7-year-old daughter. And she was the most fanatical Boostie, always getting banana buzzers. And he would always come and he wanted a discount, and we always had a laugh. And to this day, he won't pay more than that. And I won't charge him more than that. We always have a laugh. But I saw him in Bunnings and he would introduce me to a mate. Okay, do you know my daughter first met Dan when she was only like 8 years old? Then 8 years later, she started working for him, whatever it was. And now she's working for a huge job in Border Force and moved on. And I still see this guy all the time. And so that's a funny story as customers growing up as kids and they come and start working because they just love the brand and you've met so much and then they go on because we get a lot of smart people at Boost, doctors, tons of nurses, teachers, like everyone's on their way. So it's quite rewarding and the whole sibling thing. But I guess the the more meaningful ones that come from the managers that we build. We've had managers between 5 and 9 years or more come through our businesses, and some of them have stayed and grown up with us. Others have stayed for a long time and moved on to huge things, managing even bigger brands at another big level. And it's really rewarding. Like even actually, I felt it the other week on LinkedIn. I made a post for the first time in forever, and a whole bunch of employees liked it. And one even called it out on LinkedIn itself a year ago about starting out as an experience. So, and probably I appreciate it more as an older man now, not old, just older. Then have to jump in there. But because you're quite driven and ambitious when you're young, but as you get older, those kind of stories matter and you can see the impact. Maybe you're just looking for a meaning as you get older and, did I do a good job? But it's important. It's a really nice kind of feel good. And that's one of the reasons I do love our brand because of how we contribute to the community. And you can really see it. It's quite rewarding like that.
I think that's why I sort of asked that question too, is I think sometimes we get so busy working and running our businesses, we forget the impact we can have. When you're hiring that 16-year-old, you could actually change the course of their life depending on the experience and the lessons that they learn working with you in their first job. You could give them the confidence to go on and reach for their goals. I remember clearly having a moment when I was at uni where I really wanted to quit. I was struggling. I just didn't love what I was doing. And it was actually my store manager when I was working at McDonald's who sat me down and actually gave me some of the best life lessons. And to this day, I can still remember that conversation over a drink in the front patio area. And he took the time to say, "Hey, you've got this. Don't give up. Look at what you do here. This is what could happen." And I think back and, I haven't thought about that moment in such a long time until you just spoke then. And I went, wow, that was a defining moment in my life. And as an employer of people who are younger, you've got those defining moments every day of the week, and you might not realize that because time just hasn't played out yet.
Yeah, that's a huge point actually. I haven't appreciated it, but I can think of one of one of the young women that worked for me. She still calls me up and calls me dad now. Um, and she's moved away interstate, and she called a couple of days ago, and she goes, I need dad advice. And so there's this connection that kind of never goes away. So there's definitely a number of those examples, but it kind of reinforces how important it is to be like a human with humans. Sometimes we can get lost in our head with businesses, particularly if you're young and ambitious and starting out. But there's all these people, and they may appear like this gangly kid, but if you can add 10 years, I mean, that was you back then. What difference can you make for better or worse? Let's be honest. Because I can see a lot of kids not being given what they deserve in small business in many examples. And, your influence goes both ways. So let's make it good.
Mm. So I'm going to start to wrap things up. I could talk to you. We do talk a lot, so I could probably talk to you more, but we'll wrap this up. Something I always ask when I have a franchisee coming in and talking about a particular topic rather than a success story, I always like to finish off by saying, what would be, you've been a franchisee, a high level franchisee, multi-unit, well recognized within your brand. A lot of people don't realize this, but Dan was also on the board of directors for the Franchise Council of Australia. Like, you're very involved in franchising, you've done consulting. What would be your big tip for a franchisee to be a more profitable franchisee? What's your big tip?
God, my big tip. First of all, look, this is going to sound a bit cliche. There's a few things. Invest in yourself first. Like, I can't imagine how different I was 20 years ago. And, no matter how good you think you are or how motivated you are, you have to keep learning. And it really comes from reaching out. Franchising is great because we have a network, but it's terribly hard when you're self-employed on your own. It's easy within franchising, but even within franchising, people don't reach out as much as they could. You've got a powerful network there, and so you just got to check your ego, get over yourself, and learn. At conferences, we used to make a note who I'm going to talk to, what I'm going to learn, and I would just, for the first 2 hours of every night before everyone got too drunk, I would just run around and pick everyone's brain, and I made hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can remember one tip that made me over $200,000 from one of the old dogs in the network. It was amazing. Um, then looking around also, don't treat your business as a hobby. Know your numbers, get into it. There's a lot of people that they don't do reconciliations. They're putting silly things through the business. They don't truly understand where they're at. Um, and because they're only answering to themselves, there's probably a reduction actually in accountability for a considerable element of small businesses that I've worked with. Some people are really powerful and driven, and they're probably the ones listening today, but you'd be surprised. I've walked into stores, they're not even doing cash reconciliations. They wouldn't know if money's being stolen, and they're not showing up as strongly as they could. They might turn up one day a week. Like, get in there and give it a crack. It's too competitive today. It's a hard environment. Rents are the highest they've ever been. Wages are not going down. Inflation's the worst it's ever been. So we've got to fight and you've got to push yourself. So sometimes you just got to check your ego at the door because my favorite saying is, businesses are like dogs. Sooner or later, they're going to start looking like you. So if you want the business to grow, you've got to grow first and take it with you on that journey. Because the people can get lost in this like vortex. So I know there's probably not a lot of really practical tips, but it really for me starts there because then you figure out what works for you. Yes, go and do a course, talk to people, learn these things. But if you don't have the right attitude to begin with, it's going to be very hard because you're going to go, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't matter. You're going to be negative Nancy and just say no to a lot of the opportunities or not turn up to listen. You're just going to turn up to validate what you already know. And if you keep doing that, you can't improve. So, I mean, unless you're a millionaire, then you can tell me to shut up. But in other ways, keep pushing.
No, it's fantastic. We're going to finish up, and I want to say thank you to Dan for joining us today. And if you're seeing this on anywhere, make sure you put a comment to say thanks to Dan for giving us his time today and helping us out. I want to just let everyone know, I've been encouraging Dan to be doing more talking and more presentations and consulting with franchisors and franchisees. So if you've loved hearing from Dan, reach out to him. I'm going to put your LinkedIn bio into the show notes so that people do it. He's done a couple of presentations recently and getting great feedback, and you can see why that wealth of knowledge that's there. Absolutely better than any generational speaker I've heard because it's actual practical tips for us. So thank you so much for joining us, Dan. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone next week on the podcast, and keep reaching out. I love hearing from real life franchisees with real life stories that will help you further. So thanks very much for joining us, Dan.
No worries. Thanks for having me. It was great. Thanks, Trace.